What is the mitigation? What's the cost of mitigation? That's what we should be looking at. What's the least cost solution rather than just paying people out? So these problems happen all the time, and it's important to think of them not in terms of blame, which is sort of what we're trained to do. It's important to think about them in terms of the cost of the solution. Okay? So going back to Coase, he says, yeah, negotiate and you get to the right solution. It's a simple case of reciprocity. You can negotiate right through after the courts have settled, and you arrive at the simple solution, at the most economic solution. What's the problem with that? Foresee any problems?
Transaction costs?
Yep. Problem with Coase is the markets might not be conducive to negotiating. There could be transactions costs. Sometimes the cost of arguing and trying to reach an efficient solution is more than the solution. And if that's the case, it's not worth it. So you have to think about all the costs, including the transaction costs. Okay? The other thing could be that the groups we're negotiating with are too large. They're large and they're spread out, and it's difficult to negotiate as a collective. And so if you don't have this collective group that speaks with one voice or has the same idea about what should happen, it's really difficult to arrive at a solution. In the case I'm working on, there are only, I don't know, a handful of families that we talk to. So they're in agreement of what to do and what the effects are. So it's basically two parties, the people who are affected and the mine. What else? I'm asking all these questions, and I realize you guys have all these notes, so tell me what I've written down. Okay, society might be just more interested in litigation. And what else? We'll say imperfect information. When we're trying to achieve the most efficient solution, we might not know what those solutions entail. What is the cost of retrofitting? Does retrofitting work in the case of fire? For the most part, it does. So you might not have that information, you might not have the cost information, those types of things. Okay. So I said that externalities and all forms of market failure, the public property, the monopolies, imperfect information, the lack of a market, all these things beg the question of government intervention. So that's often what happens, and we can increase cost or internalize costs through taxes. We can assign property rights and award subsidies to create incentives. And those graphs are in there, I'm not going to go over them. The other thing that happens is that governments fail. Right? So we do have government solutions. That's clear. They have the power to regulate, they have the power to tax, they have the ability to redistribute income and provide subsidies. So they can do a number of things. They can enforce laws. But governments fail as well. Now what do I mean by fail? Am I talking about a coup or what?
You might not efficiently allocate resources or complicate the most efficient solution.
Same deal. Just like market failure, this is the failure to allocate resources efficiently. Okay. So why would governments not allocate resources efficiently?
Because they want to get voted back in.
That's the number one reason, right? They have different motives or incentives. Is the government making any promises these days, given that there's an election and A few weeks? What are they promising?
The rent thing.
Rent control.
Rent control,
Okay,
NEP wants to do.
So I get cheaper.
that's a perfect example of what? What's it gonna cause?
Less investment in
Yeah.
housing.
Remember we talked about supply and demand and you fix prices? They're talking about fixing prices, so what will that do? They're talking about fixing prices above or below equilibrium? Below. So what's demand gonna be and what's supply gonna be?
Demand will be greater than supply.
Yeah. So actually, they're gonna create a shortage if they do that. So if you start monkeying around with prices in the market, it will actually reduce the amount of quality housing for the people in that market. So think about this when you're going to the polls.
Politics.
What's that, them?
No, you
What do you mean, me?
just told us to go to the polls
Oh,
and vote against rent control. You shouldn't say that.
but I'm an economist, so I have to say that.
You're not a politician.
But I wasn't telling you to vote for one party or another.
Slightly implied, sorry.
Oh, okay, yeah, I guess it does, because you know which party is which. I'm not advocating that you vote for one party or another. From an economic perspective, I would suggest that you think like an economist and think about how tax dollars are spent in an efficient manner. That is my professional opinion. Okay, motives and incentives. How else does government fail? How does the government measure success?
If the people are happy and the corporations are happy,
Yeah, there's interest groups, right? How else do they measure success? It's a key,
GDP.
no, we're thinking, think about in terms of policies and programs and budgets. If the budgets are up and they spend more, they actually use a budget criterion to determine success. We spent $1 million on this particular program, therefore it's a success. We have all these different programs, so we're successful. So rather than talking about efficiency and what they're delivering, they talk about numbers in terms of totals. Like the total number of dollars spent. So when you think about budgets at the end of the year, what do government bodies typically do? Say they've got 100,000 left in their budget. What are they going to do if they've got the last month to spend it? Are they going to just say, no, we actually don't need that? Because what happens then the year after?
Get cut out of their budget.
Yeah, they'll cut their budget, right? So what do they have a strong incentive to do?
spend money.
Spend money, waste money. They don't necessarily have an incentive to roll it over because the way the government budgets work, the one I work with University of the Arctic, is the same. If we don't spend our money on curriculum development by the end of the year, we don't get that money next year. And so we might need to spend it, a month or two later to get the best bang for our buck. Say we don't have a good author yet. We have an incentive to spend that money in an inefficient manner. So because the way the system is set up, interest groups, incentives, all this kind of stuff leads to budget maximization. So what else do we have? Oh yeah, last one. The government is a monopoly, right? So we could say lack of competition. When we talked about externalities, we talked about market failure, we talked about externalities, variety of things, lack of information, lack of competition, this monopoly. If that creates market failure, that also creates government failure.
Doesn't the government have competition with the other parties?
Yeah, they are majority.
Sort of.
So like,
There's
so this, they don't
opposition.
have competition, say for four years or whatever, but they
Mhm.
still do have competition because
Yeah.
especially the closer you get to the election date, so they still do have competition, don't they?
That's a good point. There is opposition, right? But when you think of lack of competition, I'm thinking more about like Canada Post. Canada Post does have competition now because we've got more UPS and FedEx and all those other ones, but not for letters, right? Those guys don't carry letters, regular mail. So every year the price of stamps goes up. Every year, I don't know, my mailman never shows up on Friday. I'm suspicious. But, so lack of competition in that perspective, from that
They go
perspective.
up though, just because like there's more online lettering and emails and whatnot.
That's a good point. They're
So I
starting
don't
to
know
be
how much more-
competition.
Yeah, they couldn't really raise that price of stamps that much, if people just go more towards online mailing. It's-
Yeah, yeah, good point. What are those called? Substitutes. Yeah. Okay. Generally, the government that's in control can set prices and do those types of things. There is opposition, but they could be considered a monopoly in some cases. Okay, last one we could add is, okay, lack of information. If the private market doesn't have information, oftentimes the government doesn't either, including about what society values and how to allocate those resources based on individual or based on a market, largely because there is no market, and then because this happens. There's motives and incentives to please certain groups to get the votes to get back in. Okay, any questions about government failure? Okay, that will be the end. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing. What happens if somebody moves in? Let's say an airport is established. What happens to the price of your house, you think? They put in a new runway over there and then your house was sitting here, or they put in a new mine, or they close a mine.
Decrease in value.
Yeah, the value decreases. Is that an externality? Not exactly. External to the market means that the price, the damage is not included in the cost or in the price. If the price changes, it means the damage is internalized. The market is reflecting that damage. It's called a pecuniary effect, okay? So anytime you see a price change, it's not considered an externality because it's not external to the market. It is damaging to that third party, but it's not considered an externality. The market is not failing. The market is allocating resources efficiently because of supply and demand and those effects. Okay, so that's called pecuniary externality. It means a change in the price. Okay, I will give back your papers, and then I want to talk a little bit about what I expect for the next assignment, which is what, an outline. We put the wiki on hold, or we canceled the wiki, so the next one is an outline. So it shouldn't take as much writing. And maybe what I'll do is I'll repost with more detail what I want from you for the outline. I thought I was giving you enough information, but maybe I'm not. What do you guys think? Need more information, or?
Yeah, outline of what?
Yeah? Okay, well, if you don't, it's going to be extra, and if you do, I'll make more information. I have to fly to Nova Scotia at 2 o'clock, so I'm not going to be able to post the lecture, and I'm not going to be able to change anything. So I don't get back till Saturday. I have to fly to Nova Scotia to give a 15-minute talk. I don't get there till 1 tonight, or 1:30, and then I speak at 9:30. Yep, that's the one. Anyway, I'm going to be bagged. So let's give these back. Generally, here's where I'm at with your papers. And I kind of feel some people are better writers than others, and it takes a lot of work, and I appreciate the people who put time into it. There's some that not a lot of time went into, I don't think.